The world unfolds differently for each of us. Why? Where do the rules come from? Within each of us, there is a unique philosophy shaping our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, worldviews, and actions. This is Inner Dialogues with Ecem, an introspective space for curious souls and minds. This is where you get to understand your individual philosophy that writes the script of your life. This is where we unveil the inner wisdom that guides you. Yep, that was your inner sage knocking the door. Let's go and chat with him. Attention, fellow human organisms. We gather today to dissect a critical existential threat. No, not climate change. A far graver peril. The epidemic of taking ourselves too seriously. Okay, maybe that was a bit too much, but hello, hi, it's Ecem. Welcome back to Inner Dialogues with me. Why we had such a ridiculous start is because of today's topic. Today we're gonna untangle the philosophy of taking ourselves too seriously. I want us to feel lightened up a bit. I want us to laugh at ourselves and find joy in our cringe moments and our not so perfect moments. By the way, I can be dramatic and serious when time and space allow me to be. But just to give AI its due, that dramatic piece you heard at the beginning was written by AI. Anyway, let's start. I want to start by mentioning and talking a bit about where this episode found its inspiration from. I was watching a recent interview of Billie Eilish and FINNEAS on Apple Music, where they were talking about the recent album of Billie Eilish. They mentioned a game the two came up with, which was called Fear or Fart. How they came up with this game was that they were listening to music by some other artists and they were commenting on like, does this person likes to smell his own fart? They were reviewing songs like this in their studio and they realized that when they went over Billie's last album, Happier Than Ever, it was totally a fart. It was because FINNEAS says that record was made by people who had just been told the nicest things imaginable and who sat around making songs thinking that we are so good. He says that there were some songs that they worked on for one day, just a day, and they were like, done. Although he was emphasizing not to overthink when it comes to creativity and art, he was saying that album and the way they worked on some of those songs were not overthinking. It was totally feeling full of yourself and feeling almost cocky. What they have done differently in their recent album, Hit Me Hard and Soft, is that they brought the humor back, says FINNEAS, from Billie's first albums, where they mocked themselves and didn't take themselves too seriously. This is where the difference from fart and fear comes in. How fear looks like in this game is basically second-guessing yourself. Billie Eilish says that this was the case for her recent album. For the whole duration when they worked on this album, she says that they were not sure if they were making anything good. This time it might be terrible, she says. The interesting thing about this game is that they say that both fear and fart could be good as much as they could be terrible. FINNEAS says, quote, you can make a great album with the vibe of, I'm so awesome, and it can be good, and also it can get in the way. And fear as well can get in your way and prevent you from taking risks. End quote. Fear is second-guessing ourselves. Fart is, I know this. Billie Eilish says that her album, Happier Than Ever, was a lot of fart because they were taking themselves a little too seriously, although the songs were beautiful. Phineas says that Billie's first album, When We All Fall Asleep, was Fear. It was full of humor and full of not knowing what they were actually doing and making fun of themselves and the things they were creating. Taking ourselves less seriously, I think, gives us a space where we can be imperfect and where we can make mistakes. And most of the time, those imperfections make the final product unique and wonderful because they are free from the burden of perfection and seriousness. Phineas says such a philosophical sentence in that interview. He says, quote, "I think if you can be funny, you can be so much more serious. I think if you're always this serious, it starts to lose meaning and stop impacting you." End quote. I think it is so true. Of course, it is crucial to maintain a consistent characteristic, but if you're always on the same level of seriousness, vulnerability, humor, feeling ready to go and take the action, whatever that state is, I think if we are not dynamic, we cannot allow ourselves to give breathing space for our less dominant sides and provide them with a voice and space to live in and to basically create something unique. And being that dynamic sometimes doesn't feel right. Sometimes you feel you are creating something that doesn't gonna end up good. Like most of the podcast episodes, when I write a script for them, most of the time there is this confusing feeling in my mind. Such a weird thing to say, that a feeling in my mind. But I feel confused in my mind because many ideas are floating within my head and I'm looking for ways to connect them. At the same time, I'm driven by a feeling that is born from all these inspirations around me, so it is very vulnerable and personal. And this combo is such a different one. And in almost all episodes, I had to deal with this imperfection, incompleteness, and confusion in the process of writing the script and recording the episode. I think how I deal with is just continuing. Really, it doesn't sound like magic, but just following the thread that I started, Phineas again puts this idea that the creation process doesn't have to feel good to create a beautiful end product in the following way. Quote, "I'm so relieved that I feel so great about this album because there were weeks on end of making it where I was like, I think we've lost it. And I think sometimes you think while you're making something that it has to feel good in the moment to end up good. It is hard not to feel that way because I feel so out of my comfort zone. I feel so vulnerable." End quote. Zane, the interviewer, completes him by saying, quote, "That's fart. To love it while you make it, that's fart. A little bit of fear is good in that moment of creation." End quote. When he said that, I thought about cooking. I love cooking. I love improvisation in cooking. And that improvisation process feels good in some way, but more so, I feel not sure because let's think of a dough. A mixture of dough in the process of making the dough doesn't look good, doesn't feel right. But as you mix it more, knead it more, and add a little bit more flour, and then lastly put it in the oven, it looks beautiful. And when you eat it, it tastes wonderful, hopefully. And sometimes you follow a recipe, which is by definition a tried and succeeded way of cooking that specific thing. So you start by feeling confident, you do it with joy and so much enthusiasm. And what ends up happening is that it turns out something completely different than what the recipe was promising. You don't like the end product. Both of them are fine, by the way. If your creation process feels totally good, then that's also fine. As we said in the beginning, fart is no better than fear. Fear is no better than fart. Feeling like, I know this, is no better than second-guessing yourself. Second-guessing yourself is no better than taking yourself too seriously. It's just that we sometimes get lost in that seriousness. We stiffen. Or sometimes we get blinded by it in a way that we don't see the puncture. This can happen in an academic piece of work, for example. For someone who started their bachelor's degree, can write a paper with all their seriousness and enthusiasm for this new subject that they are learning, which can make them blind in seeing the obvious weak point, which could be a possible objection to their argument. Or the opposite can happen, right? They can get paralyzed by this fear. They can second guess themselves so much so that they cannot write the paper. I guess we are following interviews in this episode, but for me this time the thread of inspiration is dragging me in this way. One of my friends sent me an interview with Eddie Redmayne. Most of us know him as Stephen Hawking, but I'm a big fan of Fantastic Beasts and the Danish Girl. That interview made me realize how much I love seeing him perform and speak in general, because as he speaks, you witness a performance. So if you're enthusiastic about performing arts and theater with so much sincerity I would highly encourage you to watch the whole interview, which is like 9 minutes long anyway. By the way, I haven't said this before, but I always put all the references and inspirations for each episode into the episode description. So, as always, you can find all the mentioned bits and pieces there. Anyway, Eddie Redmayne talks about this clown school that he went to in Paris in the process of preparation for his cabaret. His character there, MC, requires an element of humiliation, he says, where you mock yourself and piss out of other people. So he wanted to throw himself into the mix by applying to this school in Paris, which is a sort of clowning and physical theater school, in his words. When he got accepted into the school, these two doyen French teachers asked him to put on masks and do an improvisation. And this is what happens. I'm going to let you hear from his epic and unique way of telling it.
I stood up and I think I had sort of just started. I'd inched into doing an improvisation. And before I'd said about 3 words, they were like, no, ça marche pas. And they sort of sat me down and they told me how horrendous it was. And it was ritual humiliation, but it was secretly kind of rewarding. It was kind of like a sort of masochistic kind of training.
Humiliating, he said. You do an improvisation, and the second you start doing it, they stop you from it because you basically mess it up. But still, you're able to say that it was secretly rewarding. I can see that. I can understand that. But for me, it is very hard. Like doing an improvisation in a clowning school, I think, would already require you to let that seriousness out at the door. But even if you think that you left it out at the door, you can still get offended when someone doesn't like your performance. In this crucial moment, I think, comes the magic of taking yourself less seriously. Acting is like the prototype of ritual humiliation, like he used the specific wording, right? Especially if you're doing comedy, you open yourself to the possibility of looking stupid and silly and being judged for it. But what to do with that so-called ritual humiliation is up to you. In the case of Eddie Redmayne, he chooses to improve his acting by taking himself less seriously. He actually starts the interview by saying that the game, I assume that they played in the talk show in which he gives this interview, was the sort of form of toxic public humiliation, like in the case of him always being useless at family games, he says. He starts by taking himself not too seriously in a way that he can say that it was humiliating for him to be on that game show, whatever that was, in front of millions of people watching that talk show. And then he mentions another example about this clowning school, which was again humiliating, but secretly rewarding. And finally, the way the interview ends is just epic. I highly encourage you to go and watch at least the last 2 minutes of his interview, where he teaches the opening scene of his cabaret to Jimmy Fallon. It's a pure way of witnessing how publicly humiliating yourself and taking yourself less seriously can turn into an art. His taking himself not that much seriously, I think, made him so much flexible in his acting and performing skills in general. He didn't get stiffened when the toxic public humiliation hit him in Family Games, or way worse, in the clowning school, so much so that he created a masterpiece with his cabaret. Why I said public humiliation, finding the reward in it, is very hard for me, because when I used to do theater, I remember that my stomach used to be in knots when we were auditioning for specific roles. And what I mean by specific is that the roles that are not serious but rather silly, require improvisation, funny and humorous roles and characters. Now I can understand why it was nerve-wracking for me to be chosen for that kind of role. It was because I was so afraid to publicly humiliate myself. I was already getting bullied, so the possibility of another layer of public humiliation, although not in a literal sense, was too much for me. And I think it turned into a habit for me, like not being able to make fun of myself. If you haven't gotten sick of interviews in this episode, I have another one that I want to share with you, but this time it's a TED Talk. But before that, I want to share something about this podcast. It is very interesting how I get to create these episodes, because I tried to explain this to one of my friends who asked me how I come up with episodes. I said something like, almost the topic calls me, like a topic becomes the center of my life for that week or a couple of days, and the things I watch start to feed that topic. But the funny thing is that I don't realize that the things I watch, I listen to, and I have conversations around are creating a common theme, because they probably are not, not for another person, but for me, they create thoughts which were spread all around my mind. And when I realize the start of a thread, I follow it, and somehow a further thread forms between all these things I consumed and thought upon recently. Episode 4 was a transparent one in this process of creation, but anyway, maybe we can talk about it in another episode. Back to the TED Talk that I was going to mention it to you. I think it was yesterday that I received a YouTube notification of this new TED Talk, which was called Why You Should Take Yourself Less Seriously by Paul Osincup at TEDx Montana State University. Ironic, right? I knew at that time that I needed to watch it. I watched it today as I was writing the script for this episode, and it was just very humbling and very reflective of the state that I was currently in. He was saying that, quote, there is a massive subsection of people who are suffering from chronic seriousness, and those people are called adults. End quote. He then shared the result of a survey made with 1.4 million people across 166 countries, and he said, quote, our propensity to laugh just nosedives about the time we hit 23. End quote. At that moment, when I heard him saying that, I had flashbacks of me driving with my most serious face, waiting in a queue again with my most serious face ever, being annoyed by myself with the system we live in and the situations I come across, and having the internal battles of these things while putting my best serious face ever. In the previous episodes as well, I said I was dealing with some adult issues nowadays, like figuring out the systems in public hospitals, dealing with delays, traffic, finding parking, bureaucracy, and many, many so-called daily hassles. I think they were feeling like so-called adult issues because I was being way too much adult in them, if that makes sense. I mean, yes, hospitals, government institutions, traffic, and driving a car are serious topics and concerns in life, but do they have to be that serious? So much so serious that we even forget to smile, find humor in it, look at ourselves from a bigger perspective? To empathize with others whom we share the same situation and environment with. Does it have to be that serious? Or maybe the right way to ask is, do we have to be that serious? He further makes a great point about this transition where we lose our laughing abilities and start to get too stuck in seriousness. He says, quote, "Sometime between our adolescence and new employee orientation, we lose the ability to find humor in something. As we transition from soccer practices to bass practice, playground slides to PowerPoint slides, teddy bears to TED Talks, all of a sudden it's like we have jobs now and everything has to feel crucially serious." End quote. This is literally what happened and what is happening to me. When I hit 23, I started working in my first official job. And things have started to change. Like, I was trying to understand the professional grounds, the business language, the attitude. Although I was working in a pretty chill working environment, I would say, there were still things that I had to comply with, of course. Business language and emails, meetings and manners, etc. And I think now I can look back to that Ecem. She was trying to do the best she could possibly do, but that led her to take herself too seriously at the same time. She got constrained in the borders of her seriousness. She got restricted in adulthood, Not just with the job, of course, but all other adult things like getting a driver license, taking out a loan, starting your own business, getting your first credit card, starting to pay your taxes and health insurances, etc. All these adult responsibilities pushed my humor away, mostly the self-humor, I would say, the ability to make fun of myself, the ability to take myself less seriously, the ability to make fun of how I try to comply with the dress code of adulthood. I also think that most of the time, before we can beat the system and break the rules, we should get acquainted with the borders of the rules first. Like, what were the rules in school? We first learned them, then we learned to follow the rules, and then we learned to stretch them and occasionally break them. Can we apply the same logic to the rules of being an adult or any social norm? I think to some extent we definitely can. The previous survey result that I shared from Paul Osincup's TED Talk about how our inclination to laugh drastically goes down about the time we become 23, I think can be taken as one rule of being an adult. As I shared before, he also said that there's a huge amount of people who suffer from chronic seriousness and they are called adults. Not laughing and chronically being serious are in our pockets as two rules of being an adult. Now, we can stretch and break them based on our values and who we want to be in this life. Do I want to be serious all the time? Do I want to forget to laugh? Don't I want to see the humor in every situation? Do I want to have the flexibility that humor can bring me? Of course, these are very loaded questions which are reflecting my thoughts and ideas about how I want to go out of my perception of adulthood and its definition I formed in my mind. As I grow older and older, it is getting harder for me to stretch the dress code of adulthood, especially when it comes to humor. Humor and being able to make fun of myself are definitely my areas for improvement, but more than that, I feel like the more I rely on being serious and taking myself too seriously, the norms of adulthood stick on me as if they are becoming ossified and inflexible. This reminded me of Paul Osincup's analogy from that TED Talk. He said, quote, "After all, they say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? Have you ever had lemonade just made from lemons? Here's a cold glass of citric acid. No. To make lemonade, you need sweetener as well. Humor is life's sweetener." End quote. The seriousness that I stuck in being an adult tastes like lemonade made from only lemons. If I were to add some humor to my life and the ability to make fun of myself, it would feel like a lemonade made from lemons and a bit sweetener. The perfect balance. Humor is life's sweetener. Love this saying. And I'm going to leave you with this note and a couple of questions for all of us. How can we find the humor in a situation that usually makes us tense? How can we interpret it differently through the lens of humor? Maybe it's the long line at the grocery store or the traffic or finding parking or a frustrating technical glitch or even that inner critic holding you back. Remember the fart and fear game? Are we taking ourselves too seriously to create things and do things from a place of, I know this? Or are we second guessing ourselves? Remember, one is not better or worse than the other. Both of their end products can be pretty well. It's just that realizing where we are functioning from and deciding intentionally from where we want to form our relationships, art, and our lives in general. Fear can hold us back. Second guessing can hold us back as much as the attitude of, I know this, can hold us back. Taking ourselves too seriously can hold us back. But what would happen if we were to add sprinkles of humor to our lives? Can we laugh at some situations? Can we laugh at ourselves when we are too serious? Can we even laugh at our self-doubts? Can we find the absurdity? Can we exaggerate our default serious reactions so that we can make fun of ourselves and get flexible in our minds? Can we be less rigid with how we define ourselves? Can we not get stuck into the controlling mechanism that is operating behind our serious faces? Can we maybe realize how we judge others when they live with their humor, make fun of themselves, and take situations lightheartedly? What are your small joys, laughs, and absurdities in life? I will leave all of us with these questions to live by. As our conversation for today fades away, may you find your humorous and lighthearted echoes of it that resonate within you. Thanks for listening today. This is Inner Dialogues with Ecem, a place where you discover your inner you, a place where you belong. Take care and loosen your grip.